All right, good morning. We're going to get started. So first thing I want to talk about, we introduced the topic that we're going to be covering this semester, last class. All right, so we talked about, last class we talked about the project idea, which is to create an application to help us manage our chores at home, including maintenance activities on our house, but also just doing chores when they need to and on a scheduled time frame so we can stay organized. So that's what we're going to be writing our application for. I do have a subject matter expert scheduled next week to discuss this with us. And so what we are going to be doing is preparing for interview questions to ask the subject matter expert. And before we start talking about interview questions, I want you to understand what the goal of the interview questions are. So you created a goal and a problem statement. Hopefully you're starting to understand more and more of the problem, and ideally you've started to research this and you've started to see what maybe this problem would be. Now, just because you've completed the problem statement doesn't mean you're done with the problem statement. Everybody understand that? This is a process that's going to continue to evolve. So as we start to learn more in the next week or two, that problem statement will change. You may understand the problem better than you did a couple days ago. And then, so do not think that just because you've gotten past that progress submittal milestone that you can no longer deal with the problem statement. The problem statement is absolutely critical because the problem statement justifies the functional requirements, which we'll talk about in a minute. Without the problems, you cannot justify the requirements. So in the future, I'm going to be asking you to create requirements, right? So when you create those requirements, I'm going to ask if those requirements are justified, and they will not be justified unless you have a problem statement that justifies them. So you may want to include a problem statement, and you may want to include a particular function requirement. And if your problem statement is not revised to that effect yet, then you will need to go back and revise the problem statement to address a problem that the function requirement solves. So let me have our subject matter expert in here. We will be asking this person questions. In fact, we're going to have a session where we ask me questions, ourselves questions. And so you need to start preparing candidate interview questions for these two events. One will be just talking to somebody, and then one will be us as a group just chatting it out. There are three categories of questions, and you need to start preparing questions for these three categories. So I'm going to now explain those categories to you. And then you will create that outlines those three types of questions. And then you will submit that document to Blackboard next month. Any questions about that? This is your interview question assignment. So the document you produce will be in Blackboard, and the document will have three headers in it. This will be scope questions, then functional questions, and this will be non-functional questions. You understand me? You'll write as many questions as you can come up with. And as due before next class. Now, in addition to understanding questions, you must also deal with a couple of other issues. So let me talk about that. Now, when we get ready to write software or design a package for somebody, the first goal is to discover, emphasis on the word discover, not manipulate or manufacture, but to discover questions or to discover requirements. There are many ways you can do this. The first and best way is to do an interview with the people involved in the organization, whether it be the system owners, whether it be users of the software, whether it be different managers, different people that have been involved in the process. That would be the best way to learn what you need to know to continues, right? Sometimes we can do surveys, and those will work too, but the best way is a workplace interview. There are other ways. One way is the artifact discovery. What artifact discovery is going to the workplace and reviewing documents that they have already produced. Documentation and/or software that they've already produced is gold. Typically, somebody who understands the work of business organization has spent time reading that document. That document typically reflects a business process which you need to understand. As an analysis person, you cannot go into the environment and start making sweeping changes in their organization without understanding the workflow that was involved in the first place. Does this make sense? The best way to do that is by artifact discovery. So you go into the organization, you will find that there are forms, charts, processes, maybe existing software, Excel spreadsheets that they're already using. No organization starts by having some formal or informal process for documenting, for tracking what they do in the business. So you will find out what those are, and you start to build questions about that or start to discover requirements. You follow me on this? So the best way is questioning candidates at various organizations and understanding you can't ask questions. So obviously the business you ask one set of questions to, and the technical people you ask another set of questions to, and the financing people you ask another set of questions to. So you're going to tailor your questions to make sure you get the right information out of them. Now, preparing for and getting to the point where you can ask questions and get that result takes a little skill, and it also takes a lot of preparation. You want to make sure that you walk into an environment that you understand a lot of the answers of the questions we've asked them, because you want to make sure that you can track the flow in the process exactly what you need. The interview process is to fill in the blanks. It's not to completely solve the thing. You don't want to completely define. You want to go in understanding kind of where you're going, and then use the question to fill the blanks. So before we have our interview, before we have our session, you're going to understand already where you're going before you get there. And I'm going to talk about how you're going to do that in a second. But the number one point is you are going to be creating interview questions, loaded interview questions based on your research of the problem, based on your research of artifacts and other software packages, in order to come up with some well-defined questions in order to get at the truth of the matter, right? And the truth of the matter is in these three subject areas, okay? All right. The other way that you can do this is by reviewing other companies, organizations, or other software packages that have already solved this problem or are attempting to solve the problem. And that is what you are going to do in the next week. So starting next class, I reserve the right, and I will pull a candidate to talk about the software or the solution that they discovered in their research, to explain it to the rest of us as a group is all benefit. So you need to go out on your own reconnaissance and start researching software packages that solve our chore problem, right? I'm sure there's plenty of them, right? Anybody already discovered one? What are you looking at? Right? You got one? Okay. Were they good or bad or? Okay. Good. So see, there's some out there. So go out there and find one. It could be an app. It could be a website. It could be just software. I don't care. It could be a system. It doesn't even have to be software. It could be just a system that somebody's created, right? That would even be better. A system that somebody's created for cleaning their house. If you could find that, that would be good. We could learn a lot from there. So your job is to go out there and learn what other people are doing to solve this problem, right? And you are going to learn about the problem they're addressing, the solutions they've done, and learn as much as you can. And then you're going to take that information and you're going to start building questions. In addition, you're just going to be thinking. You're going to think about what questions we might want to ask, and you're going to put them into this format. Scope, functional, non-functional. Right. And I'm going to explain what these three categories are. So starting next class, I will most likely ask people at random, show us the software you found, the solution you found, and what do you think about it? Right? Now, do not be caught not having done your homework. There's a humiliated element, not a very good motivator. Right? Fear is a great motivator. So worse than having to talk to the group about what you found is not having anything to share with the group because you didn't do it, right? So you are going to research a software package or a solution and learn about it and understand what the problem they're addressing, what features they come up with, understand the depth, and be able to answer questions about in the group. That's what you're going to be doing. All right. Next, let's talk about these three category areas, which are your interview questions. By the way, the interview questions need to be intelligent. Like, you thought through the process. Just because you come up with a question doesn't mean it's good, right? So many of you think that I'm just going to solve this assignment. I'm going to come up with a list of inane questions that don't really mean anything. Your questions must be meaningful, meaning they must seek for the truth of the matter as the best of your ability, right? So, first area of questioning. And by the way, I don't want to be asking, well, how many questions do I need to have each? Right? If you have to ask, I don't really care about the question. Right? What I care about is asking enough questions to reach the truth of the matter. Okay? So do we have enough questions in each of these categories of truth? That's what we know. So if you have to ask, you say, well, how many questions do I have? I don't know how many questions I need to ask. Right? So don't have to wait to 50 and then be sitting there racking your brain all night for 50 questions, right? It doesn't matter how many questions. What matters is over there. I would say if you have less than 10 per category, you're not doing a good job. So let's talk about scope. What is scope? So we've come up with the problem. We've come up with the problem. And we've come up with the goal. Now, that's nice, but more important to us as a designer, we do not want to be covering things you have to cover. It's going to go back, right? You want to make sure that you limit the scope as much as possible. So scope is a limiting function, and only a limiting function. So we're going to find out how we can limit this function to a certain universe, right? So one great question might be, are we designing a software for everyone on the entire planet? Or are we limiting this to only North America? Or limiting this to California? Or is there an audience that we're limiting? Is it limited only to English speakers? Or are we focusing on Chinese speakers, Spanish speakers, language? These are examples of scope limiting kind of questions. Does this make sense? So when we develop the audience that we're approaching, right? We also want to define subject matters we're dealing with. So we've talked about this being a chore application, right? What are we talking about? You know, what type are we dealing with? Outdoor stuff? Is it indoor stuff or outdoor stuff, right? Is it indoor and outdoor, or is it both? Right? That would be a great question. Do you see what I'm talking about? I'm looking at the more the scope of the project, the easier it is for us. Because that's the fine thing we're chasing, right? Any questions about that so far? So this is the scope, yeah. Go ahead. Well, no, you're creating questions that we are going to either ask the subject matter expert or we are going to ask ourselves in an upcoming JRP session. So you're writing open-ended questions that we hope to seek and find the answer for. And to see the answers to that, we will start to write or correct statements we've already written. Think about it. This is for, in this case, consider me the client. It's for me. I am hiring you to write me some stuff for helping my chore better. I am hiring you to write stuff for these chores better. Because there's a lot of people who buy a lot of money. Okay? So I'm hiring you to develop me an application to make you rich. Right? So look at it that way. Right? So this entire time we're doing this software, we need to be justifying the business approach. Does this software make business sense? Really much that's the goal. So we do not want to be writing software that nobody will use or that nobody will find attractive, that will not be worth anything. So anything that I do makes sense. So yeah, definitely. So write your questions open-ended that we will ask me, the letter expert, and we will ask ourselves. Okay, so that is the scope. Does everybody understand what scope means? Now you are going to be writing a scope statement. The scope statement is a limiting paragraph. It is a one or more paragraphs in which you limit what is not doing. Nothing else. You don't tell me anything else about the project. You don't tell me what it's going to do, anything like that. They say, this is what it will not do. It will not be written in Mandarin Chinese. It will not be written for people living on Mars. It will be only for English speakers in North America, right, as an example. It will only be for indoor activities, not outdoor activities, as an example. You see how I'm limiting the scope. I'm narrowing down the scope of this project to include a subset of it. So we could talk about domains that it covers. We could talk about who it will affect. We could talk about what languages it'll be in. We could talk about what types of activities we'll document, right? We could talk about things that it might be able to do or not be able to do. For example, do we want to open this application up to advertisers of clinics? That's a great question, right? So do we anticipate there being advertising in this application? There's a scope question for you. Hopefully you're writing that down. I've already given you, right? So we're writing those types. Will people be a scope question? Why is it a great scope question? Because if we have a shopping cart model, that is going to add complexity, right? So anything we can do to reduce the complexity, so it's not so difficult, or reduce the level of effort in the software. So the scope. Any question about scope? You're not writing a stick right now. You will be. You are going to be very quickly here. So the whole process of the introductory thing is that we have to write for a project, and you've already written the problem, or you've got the problem. And your next task is going to write the scope statement. So I want you to start thinking about scope issues. All right. Next area is functional versus non-functional. Now, this tends to be a bit of a debate in class sometimes because people don't quite understand it, and it is a little bit gray. So, unfortunately, we don't live in black and white. Things are gray. Sometimes it's kind of hard to define the two. But I'm going to do the best I can to define them, and it's up to you to figure out what category they fit into, right? But I can tell you some things that are clearly non-functional and some things that are clearly functional. So let me just start with non-functional. What's clearly non-functional? Now, very important, many of you will think that functional is somehow better than non-functional because non-functional has the non in front of it, therefore somehow it's worse. That's not true. Non-functional and functional are equally important. They're just dealt with at different times during software development. Functional, we deal with functional we deal with right away. They are part of functional requirements we deal with immediately. They help us to define our requirements of the system. They are done during the analysis phase of the project. Make sense? So analysis and design is all about the functional requirements. And we're going to talk about how learning to discover those as we progress. So functional requirements specifically apply to the analysis and the design of the software. Non-functional requirements deal directly with implementation of the software. Right. Analysis and design is what we're going to be doing together. Implementation is what the programmer does. So a programmer takes our stuff and puts it into some language and writes it into a studio type environment and produces actual code. That is implementation. It is non-functional requirements that impact the implementation of the software. The functional requirements are separated or abstracted from the actual programming language, right? So we are going to now start at right off the top, separating functional and non-functional requirements. So functional requirements, the business requirements, will be what we deal with during the analysis of time. We will not allow ourselves to get bogged down by non-functional requirements. We'll let the programmer deal with those. They're usually constraints that the programmer will have to deal with as they're writing software. So one perfect example is a question like this. What programming language would you like to write this software in? Where does that belong? That is a non-functional requirement. Do you understand why? Because it's going into implementation. You do not have to business owners. The first stage that you're doing, you don't even get it into this program. You make it cool because you don't want to like talk to customers, paying you money about programming languages. None of the customer does care. Right? It doesn't matter. So said, does this make sense? Now, if during the discussion the customer says, I do not want this written in Java because I hate Java, if the customer says that, then you are going to put that down into a placeholder called non-functional requirements. Because it's important, obviously the customer's passionate about it, they said something about it, right? And you've recorded that. You need something to put that. You're going to put it in the non-functional or the constraint section, right? Because you've made note that the customer hates Java. So it'd be a travesty that if by the end of this project, the programmers implemented this in Java, it would be bad, right? Because the customer would say, ooh, this is written in Java. I said no Java, right? Now, whether it's in Java or C# or something else, doesn't impact the functional requirements whatsoever, right? Makes sense to you? Any questions of a technical nature like this? Like, what database are we going to use? Right? That is a non-functional requirement, right? Functional requirements will need a database, but we don't need a database or Microsoft or whatever. It doesn't matter. They're not functional. So you're not going to ask your customer this. You're not going to say, do you want Oracle? But the customer may have some predisposed ideas about what they want or don't want. They may say, or they may have some constraints. Like, for example, they may get discounts on Microsoft software. So they may tell you during your interview process, oh, by the way, we get discounts on Microsoft software, so we definitely want this written in Microsoft SQL Server. So you would put that down in your non-functional constraints. Customers requested this to be written in Microsoft, right? Because that's important to customers. It's going to be a way to save them money, but it doesn't impact your functional requirements. Another, let's see. I want the software to be really fast. I don't want slow software. I want to make sure and I want to be really fast. It's not functional, right? Software can function slower, fast, right? But it's not customer fast. Obviously fast, but the customer made an emphasis on fast. So where do we put that? We put that in non-functional. So when the programmer starts to implement this, the programmer, when they have to make decisions about whether to go one path or whether to go the other path, they can look at this, oh, wait a minute, the customer asked us to be really fast. So maybe I have to think about doing it this way because that's faster. Right? So this is an implementation question. The programmer goes with it. So you know what? If I choose this language, if I choose this methodology, if I choose this process, then it's really slow. There's just a faster way of doing it because the customer emphasized speed and efficiency. Do you follow me? What about this? The customer tells you during interviews, I want this software to be really easy to use. I want my 8-year-old daughter to be able to use this software. Functional or not functional? It's a non-functional issue, right? The software could function with or without my 8-year-old daughter, right? But the customer's requested for consideration during implementation that the software be easy to use. So the programmer's writing this and they're choosing what controls do you use, or what interfaces do you use, what type of on the software, right? If the programmer is making those decisions, they can go back to the non-functional constraints and they can say, emphasize this need to be easy to use. So that's going to impact what controls they select. Does this make sense to you? That's an implementation question. It doesn't make any work. Obviously, being fast, easy to use, right? To make it work in this category, all we're saying is we're not going to deal with this during business requirement implementation. You follow it? Stop and be backed up. Functional or not? Is it functional? Being backed up or not backed up does not impact the business requirement, right? You may think it does because it sounds businessy, but it doesn't impact a functional impact. It's going to have implementation. So the programmer is writing this. Since the customer emphasized they wanted a way to back up, the programmer needs to make sure they deal with the fact that they have some automation, right? So that is definitely a non-functional. By the way, anything that is cross-cutting, it would be across the board. Like the software should be doing logging for software. These are all considered non-functional. We handle it during the implementation, right? Any questions about the non-functional? We are not going to focus on these that much, but you need to have this section in document. Because we'll be creating non-functional requirements. I'll show you how later. But during our interview, then you'll put it in there, because you're going to be required to have something. Now, what if the customer? Yeah. Oh, you want interview questions here? Do you have any constraints about the software in regard to what technology is used to implement it? Remember, focus on words like implementation. Are there utility concerns about special requirements? These would all be non-functional types of questions. You understand? I'm asking about implementation, utility, documentation, functional or non-functional. No, it's not functional, right? Because documentation is cross-cutting. Everybody needs documentation, right? So that is one of those assumed things. Now, if the customer makes a big deal about it, this better have the documentation. I would the context-sensitive help. If the customer makes a big deal about that, then you put that in your non-functional constraints section of your document. You say the customer requested context sensitive. Now this is important because during implementation, the program be aware whenever they build in a module, they have to link to help, right? Because it's context sensitive. So that's a non-functional constraint. It doesn't impact the business requirements of the software. It's non-functional. Even though the customer really wants it. Another example. Earlier, the customer said, you know what, I want my software to be painted. Right? It's non-functional. But the customer is going to be very adamant about it. It has to be pink. They will not accept anything else other than pink. Pink, pink, pink. We'll make a documentation for the organization or the programmer or the user documentation. Well, okay, there's this art form of selecting a programmer who's actually going to get done. That is acquired. It needs to be linked to your business requirements that depth. Rock class will be addressing this issue. So that is just a foregone conclusion that a software developer should document their code. Most of them will not want to. They fight it with everything in their being. They do not want to document anything. It's anti-programmers want to document. So definitely part of the interview process, part of the acquiring of an implementation team is to define the documentation methodology and clearly establish what that's going to be. Because if you don't and you leave it up to the programmer, then nothing will happen. At the end of the project, you'll say, Well, where's that documentation? Oh, we'll get to it. And they will never get to it. It will never happen. So you must define the documentation methodology before the project starts and establish that expectation. Otherwise, it won't happen. So that's a whole separate issue. It has nothing to do with requirements of the software. That's just a foregone conclusion. Now, customer documentation is a non-functional requirement. And a lot of developed designers will put that in there automatically, just so the programmer is very much aware that end user documentation is part of this project, right? There must be end user documentation. By the way, the process that we're going to be following is going to teach you how to do end user documentation as we go through the process. Okay, so the customer says, I want this to be paint. You cannot pay for something. Now, they sound functional. Functional whether we're getting paid or not. But it is a non-functional. It is a constraint. Meaning when the developer, when the programmer goes to write the software, they have to be cognizantly aware that it has to be. So every responsibility has to deal with that vector. You follow me? That's definitely an implementation issue. All right. Any questions about non-functional before we move on? All right. Functional. This is where you're focused in on. This is the most important one. And most of your questions need to be about this. Do not confuse, although they're related, do not confuse functional with features. Features are nice things to have. Gee, I would like this feature, right? I do not want your project to turn out to be a laundry list of features. I want you to come up with functional business requirements. And how do we know they are business requirements? What do they do? What do business requirements do? I've already hinted at it. Maybe one of you picked it up. What? Nope. What's that? Yeah, it's related to making money. What do they solve for? What is that? The problem, right? So you're crafting this problem statement that reflects reality, right? The problem statement is an accurate depiction of reality, which is there are issues your customer is dealing with. They don't like those issues. They're causing the customer pain. You are now creating business requirements. Now, how do we know they're functional? Because they solve one or more problems that the customer's having, right? This is what separates a functional and non-functional requirement, right? And what makes the functional requirements legitimate, right? These are what we're trying to ask questions about. We want to find out what would solve the customer's pain. Yeah, and you're not going to ask questions to the customer like, well, do you have enough money to afford this? The point is, before you ever, and this isn't really the time or place in this class to talk about it, but if you are a person that is seeking to obtain funds for a project or find a client to fund a project, you do not engage at this level with a customer that cannot pay. You find out if they're able to pay before they become a customer. So you would qualify them to be a customer before you started the project. If I was an employee in an organization, I would not approach my boss and start getting into this discussion unless I first knew that there were funding available to fund such an effort. Otherwise, my efforts are futile, right? So you must qualify before you start the process. Qualification is huge. But that's the business issue if you want to be a consultant doing this. Right? And by the way, it's a hugely missed site. In all the traveling I've done, when I talk to business owners, and I talk to them about their process, you'd be surprised how many people forget to qualify a customer. And so you get down into the nitty-gritty of all this, and when you're halfway through it, what you don't want to have happen during your interview process is the customer saying, well, this is all stuff, right? That should have already occurred. And the art form is being able to rationally justify the cost and size and scope of a project, not really knowing all the details yet, but have a general ballpark that you and the company will come comfortable with. That is a bit of an art form. That takes experience. That's something you can't teach. So now moving on so let's keep talking about functional requirements. So functional to me in terms of what particular thing can this software do that solves your business problem, right? So what are some of our problems we've already identified? Just name one. What's that? Remembering to change my whatever it is on a regular scheduled period of time, right? That is a problem that I have. And we know it's a problem because it has major impacts. So it's the loss of my air conditioning system or heat, right? But it has impact. So what could this software do to solve that? So this is where you come up with some ideas and ask questions about it. Would you want this software to have an ability for you to input manufacturer guidelines for filter rate, for example? Well, yes, that's a great idea, right? So you're basically coming up with ideas to solve the business problem, presenting to the customer and getting their buy-in or their non-buy-in or their comment on it. The customer may like that idea, but then they'll probably suggest something. And what you're looking for is the suggestion, because the suggestion always drives what they're really looking for. So you ask the question, would you like the software to remind you of when to replace a particular perishable item? It says yes. And really important is I would like it to give me a heads up before I have to do the event to order it, right? So notice what happened there. In the answer, the customer said, confirm that your idea was a good one, but they added to it, right? And they showed you their real pain, because it's everybody's pain. When you go to do the chore, you don't have the material, then it's, now I got to order it, right? And I can remember it, you know? So this is important, right? So that's an example of making sure you leave room in your questioning for the customer to give you the suggestions, because the suggestions are valuable. Understanding how to write the functional requirements has a lot to do with your ability to do homework, to research the problem domain, to understand what other people have done, to come up with some ideas, and be able to ask those ideas to the subject matter expert or to the business owner and find out if those are good candidate ideas to solve it. Now, you're not going to ask them feature lists. Don't say things like, do you want it to have the wish list feature? Do you want it to have the add me now feature? Do you want it to have the quick add feature? These are nonsensical. You just pulled them off a website somewhere. They're features, right? Do you want the quick print feature? What? Right? You want to ask them something related to their business problem, right? Mr. Customer, I understand that remembering to do chores is a big deal. I also know that sometimes when you get a chore, you don't want to do it, right? Do you want the software to have some way to delay a chore for a predetermined amount of time so that you can do it later and then substitute with a chore you more likely want to do, right? Great question. Notice that the question addresses the business problem and asks a question that's related to a function. You follow me on that? So, preface all of your functional questioning with the problem. So what's the problem? how are we going to address the problem? All right, any questions about that? And if I were you, I would spend some time roaming around your house. And if you live in an apartment, go talk to the apartment guy, that maintenance guy that's running around all the time. Just take 5 minutes and ask them what they do on a regular basis. You'd be surprised. He's got a laundry list, I'm sure. Right? So, like, think of all the things. Just walk around your house. Think of all the things you got to do. Or go talk to mom and dad. What are all the things that they should be doing, right? I got to clean the gutters once a year. I got to wash the inside and outside of the windows once a year. I got to clean the blinds, right? I got to sweep the front porch. I got to replace the filters in the house, right? I got to, maybe there's, you know, you never know what it is. There's a million things, right? One guy told me the other day that I needed to actually grease my windows. You know where you open and close the windows? There's these little rails that it runs on that once every 3 years you should grease those. So you don't have problems opening and closing your window. That's a cool idea, but I would never remember to do that, right? Oh, yeah, another thing. In your bathrooms and showers, there's places where the water runs down your walls from, you know, water collects on the walls and runs down, and it collects down there, and it starts to erode and crack the paint. And pretty soon you've got a crack there. And water starts seeping in there and causes drywall damage. So you've got to put sealant around there now and then, right? How many people have done that recently? There you go. See, one out of all of us, right? But that's something you should do once a year, I understand. So there you go. There's an annual task, right, that I'll never remember to do, right? Never be encouraged to do. I just thought about it right now, but do you think I'm going to go home and do it today? Yeah, but I'm going to look, right? So you understand? So there's a business problem. So address the business problem and then ask the question to the customer to make sure you're on right context. Yes.
If we were to ask, if they wanted, or if to input your chores into the system, would that be non-functional, or?
Well, that's a great question. So she asked me, is inputting chores into the system functional or non-functional? It is definitely functional. So you would ask the customer, I understand that remembering all of your chores is a big deal. How would you envision these getting inputted? How would you want them to be inputted? How would you see that happening? Great question, right? And you might even come up with a suggestion. Maybe you've done some homework and you've seen some other software, and you know one way I saw doing it was this way. Another great question to ask is, some chores don't need to be done every day. Sometimes they need to be done in periods. What are the periods that you deal with? Well, I have daily, I have weekly, I have monthly, I have semi-annual, I have annual, right? So we're going to glean information out of the customer, the subject matter expert, and those are directly functional issues. Yeah.
I don't remember doing it. You said a customer problem and business problems. You have time and research right there. Strength. Is that all under non-functional?
Like project management in terms of a constraint. What do you mean by that?
Time, and resource. So the business problem.
Yeah, I understand that, but that doesn't go in there. This is related only to the accomplishment of the software. It's not when I refer to it, there's the business issue the customer deals with, and there's the business issue we would deal with on implementing the software. So, no, that would be related only to our business, which is not something we put in there. We wouldn't say, keep project management to minimum so we can make ridiculous amounts of profit. No, we wouldn't say that, right? But definitely project management on this is a critical concern for us, as well as communication, as well as regular scheduled meetings, as well as documentation. All those things are software development practices that are important, but not related to the accomplishment of customers' goals. A course that would actually be useful here would be to talk about creating a software consulting firm, right? But that would be a different subject matter. Questions about functional requirements? So you need to start building your interview questions. Scope, functional, non-functional interview questions. In order to do this, it is going to require some thoughts from you. And it's going to require in the problem area. So you need to think about the process of writing software or other people done. People know issues, problems, concerns that you might be able to address the question, right? So you got to order a confident question. Yeah. That could be a non-functional issue. Yeah, a non-functional issue. So you could ask, do you have any preferences of what the software looks like? Have you envisioned it? Yeah, I really want it to look kind of like an index card, but not, right? Yeah, or maybe they say something like, you know what, I'd really like daily tasks to be yellow, and weekly tasks to be blue. These are important, right? So you're tracking them, right? So those are great questions. Those are great questions to ask. I just want to make sure that you understand that when you ask the question, what issue are you addressing? Too many of us focus when we talk to customers about the technical details, what lines we were in the end, but we have a tablet, we have a laptop, we have a technical questions. And we got all the other stuff, right? By the way, non-functional is also any ADA constraint or things like that. You know, so we may need to find out, does this need to be, do we need to any special functions for hearing impaired or sight impaired? That would be another non-functional issue. But too many of us spend time focusing on the technical or focusing on the aesthetics. So we get into a lot of how to live. What is this flash animation come in? Around, and people think you can click on it. Yeah, and that's fun to talk about, but it has nothing to do with their business. And the customer aspect is such that everybody's smart. You start talking about like splash gee whiz things, and they're like, hey, that's really going to get excited. But then after you leave, they're sitting there thinking about it. They have to ask the question, is this person really know? The answer usually is no. If you go in there addressing the functional related to the pain, then they may not get as excited about the fancy stuff. But when you're all said and done, the customer's going to go, you know what, this person probably really is going to solve my problem because they get the pain to ask the question. Right. Oh, that's a great. No, that's a functional issue. That's very, very much. That's something I didn't even think of. Huge. How many of you got like averages? The battery wrapper. Or pictures. I have one in my house. I don't think I've tested it. Right? So there's a great couple of lines to question. Right? So I like that. That was actually battery speech, right? Or another big deal. So yeah, I like that. That's it. So yeah, it's a great function. That's functional, very functional. Good. All right. I want to just let me see. All right. Let's take a look at one thing. I just want to make sure you're all on track here before we So in Blackboard, and I'm going to the 201 course here. And section. Maybe. I may be going to the assignment section. Seems to be taking a while this morning. There we go. All right, so let's take a look at what's due coming up. By the way, I don't know if you got my announcement, but I have census due on Wednesday, which is when I decide whether or not you're in this class or not. So your completion of these first few assignments is an indicator of your willingness to participate, right? So I'm hoping that you're tracking with me. So the goal of problem statement was due today. On Wednesday, the interview questions are due, right? So you'll be turning in the interview questions. Now, that is simply going to be a Word document with 3 headers in it, right? Scope, functional, non-functional. And then you're just going to put several questions under each one of them. That's all you're doing. Nothing complicated. I just want you to be thinking about it, right? I want you to be creating questions, because when next week, when we do our JRP and we do our subject matter interview, I want to make sure that you're prepared with thoughts, questions, and you're ready, right? Because we need to start figuring out what our requirements are going to be. So that's the interview questions. Now, after that, you're going to move into scope statement. And then we're going to be moving into requirements, right? So I just want to give you a heads up as to what's happening. So Wednesday will be due the interview questions. On Wednesday, we're going to start our first kind of discussion, interview / issues. I'll primarily talk about scope on Wednesday. So you'll be asking your scope questions on Wednesday, and we'll define what the scope of this project is going to be. And then you will write your scope statement, which is going to be due Monday. On Monday, we're going to be doing a JRP session. Or what? We're not here Monday. Or whatever. I think I skipped a day there. Wednesday. Yeah, I even remembered that. See, I skipped a day. That's good. It's always nice that I remember to do that. But yeah. What did you ask?
Oh, well, I asked you, for the student option that were, you didn't want us to change it to PDF, right?
Yeah, I always change everything to PDF. The reason why is I want to be able to open it easily, and I can grade it really easily when it's in PDF in Blackboard. If it's in Word or something else, it's a little bit more difficult to deal with. If it's in PDF, it's easy for me to deal with.
All of our assignments.
Everything you should submit, convert to PDF. All right, so that's your next thing. Any questions about that so far? Got it? Everybody understand what's due? I don't have any slackers out there. It's just blowing me off. I'm not going to turn anything in for weeks. All right. Okay, because I know there's 1 or 2 of you out there. You're busy texting right now anyway, or whatever you do. All right, so okay, so we're ready to let's move on to one more discussion matter. I got a couple things I want to highlight. So pretty much over the next week or 2, I'll be highlighting a couple little ideas along the way to kind of motivate, inspire, and just general discussion purposes. So let's talk about the goal of computer science. So that'll be our subject matter for today. So does anybody want to venture a guess as to what the goal of computer science is? It relates to what we're doing here in class. Make life easier. Ease of application. Okay. Solve a problem. I like that. That's pretty good. Yeah. What else? What is the goal of computer science? And by very nature, because you, I'm assuming because you're in a class like this that you want to become computer science people or are computer science people, then what is your goal in life? What is the goal of computer science? I've got a couple ideas here. Solve problems, make life easier. What else? Yeah. What's that? To create stuff. To design stuff. Create. I like that. I like create. Create's good, yeah. To increase efficiency, effectiveness of the workforce. That's good. I like that. Yeah. To continue to improve. Yeah, sure. I like that.
Is this a subjective or objective question?
It's subjective. I'm always curious what people think computer science is. I have my opinions, which I'll tell you in a minute. But I'm naturally curious about what everybody's opinion is about computer science. Like, what's its goals? Like, what are we doing here? It's interesting to me. Go ahead. Advancing technology. Okay. Like that, yeah. Implementing the technology. A lot of people look at it that way. In fact, you came up with a creation idea. Some people are very, very creatively focused, and some people are very implementation focused. Seems to be kind of two breeds in the business. So here's what I would like to venture out, and I'd like you just to think about it. It's just a compelling thought. The goal of computer science is to get rid of people. Now, I just want you to think about that. It's a little controversial, but I want you to think about the truth of that statement. Is that a true statement? I think it is. I think it's unfortunately true. You need to remember this, because your goal is to make lots of money doing computer work. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Very good. Your goal is to make lots of money doing computer work. Now, you may have an altruistic goal above and beyond making money, right? You know, and maybe someday in your life you'll have time for the altruism. But chances are you won't for anywhere near future, and you'll be stuck with the money issue. And so how do we make money at computer science is really the question. And the answer is the same. We get rid of people. Now, we can lie to ourselves and say we're actually making it where somebody can do the job of more than one person, or we're making one person more effective, right? Like you said. And we can lie to ourselves and say that that's what we're trying to do, but in reality, we're reducing the organization's need for human resources. That's what we are doing. Think about this college right now. It's about a $60 million a year institution. That's how much taxpayer dollars we suck out of the state, about $60 million a year, give or take 10 million. What percentage of our revenues go to staffing? Let's take a wild stab at that one. It's well over 75%. I don't know what it is. It's probably 80%. Let's just throw that. I don't know what it is. I haven't looked recently. Let's just say it's 80%. And I would say generally, every organization, 80% of the costs are human resources. So if you are a computer scientist and you're coming up with compelling software that is going to reduce a company's expenses, then what is your main target area? Getting rid of people. Now, you may want to play in the 20%. Go ahead, play in the 20%. But where are most software products out there making money is the ones that deal with the 80%. 80% of the problem, right? So whether you are a consultant designing software for people, or whether you are a business owner creating software that's innovative that people will buy, or whether you are an employee who's working for somebody, it is all the same. Your argument to your employer is your efforts will reduce that employer's need for more people. By reducing the need for, I call it dude math, for reducing the need for so many dudes, your worth is increased, right? The argument is, with me and my computer expertise, I can do the work of me and these 2 or 3 coworkers, so get rid of them and pay me more. That is the general argument. Now, you don't have to say it that way. You can say it all over pretty you want to, but that is the general gist of it. Does this make sense to you? Now, it sounds very mean and evil, right? And it is a little mean and evil, but that's what computer science is all about, right? Now, I'm not saying that your sole goal in life is to actually get rid of people. I'm not saying that. I'm saying you need to remember the core business strategy, right? If you forget, and the reason I say this is I want you to remember, I'm making it sound kind of controversial because I want you to remember it. The business owner has a problem, and that is people cost him or her a lot of money, right? So you need to figure out how to justify yourself, either your position or your contract or your product in that frame of reference. Otherwise, it makes no business sense. Does this make, am I making myself clear on that? So if you are unable to frame of reference your contract, your employment, or your product in that kind of context, then you've missed the mark. Because 80% of the business owner's problem has to do with people. Right? Most software packages I know that make lots of money either replace people or reduce the organization's requirement to add people. Right? So that's just the context to think about. So in our application here, how does our application have a context in that regard? Or does it? Yeah. For example, in my household, let's pretend in my household we hire a cleaner person to come in and clean our house once a week and to do these things that we never remember to do. Number one, the cleaner person never remembers to do these things either because I'm not reminding the cleaner person to do it, right, which is a problem. But if I could come up with a system that my family could follow and actually do some good at, I could replace that contract, therefore reduce that person and save the organization money. That's a very simple way, but nonetheless, it has a business impact, right? Yeah. It reduces the need to hire a contractor, an HVAC consultant, HVAC person to come in and fix my air conditioner. So I'm reducing the number of people that I have to pay to maintain my home, right? So it always comes back to that, right? The biggest business impacts are always associated in and around people. It's just something we always forget as computer scientists. And you always got to remember. You always have to remember. It always comes back to that. You're talking about some lofty thing that the business owner is thinking about is people problems, right? You've got to make the connection. If you don't make the connection, usually you don't get the contract, or usually you're not as important and replaceable. The second the employer makes a connection that you are equal to more than one person, your lifespan in the organization lasts a very long time, right? That's what you want the employer to be believing. That you are effective because you are worth one or more than one person. And by the way, whenever I've asked for raises or whenever I've asked for another contract, I've always done all of my contracts in that context. Hey, Mr. or Mrs. Business Owner, you're paying me $4,000 a month. I really like that amount of money. I'm just reminding you that without me, you will have to go out there and hire an $80,000 a year employee to do this work instead of me, right? So just a casual reminder once a year during contract renewal time, this is what you would be spending, this is what you are spending, right? And I want a 5% increase. It's still a lot less than the employee, right? Always in that context, always, right? If you lose that context, the business owner starts thinking crazy thoughts, right? You don't want them thinking crazy thoughts. All right, any questions about what you have to do before Wednesday? Interview questions before Wednesday. And what else? Researching solutions and problems, specifically software or things like that, all right? You're done. We'll see you next. We'll see you on Wednesday.